Hi, everybody. This is Mary here with Conscious Communication at Work. And I wanted to talk today about one of the skills. I'd say this is a key skill that managers and leaders must master to build great teams, and that is giving feedback to difficult people or to people when there's personality challenges, personality dynamics in the mix. It's one thing to be able to give feedback when it's kind of cut and dry and content driven or data driven. A lot of folks find more ease with that, of course. But how do you manage things when you are talking to somebody who bugs you a little bit, or talking when you're under a lot of stress? When things are challenging. I wanted to go over a couple of basics that can really help you get started. And the first one is something that you would want to do before a conversation, and that is reframe it. Reframe. So even if you're the type of manager who's like really highly protective of your team, you probably slip into occasional comparisons. You have your favorites, and you might even have those couple of people that you think of as needy or insensitive or whatever. I mean, this labels happen. It's okay. But sometimes labeling can get especially intense, right? So if you start thinking about one of your reports or one of your colleagues as the problem child or the drama queen or the show off or the diversity hire, yikes, these are hard to say, but they run through the minds of managers every day. And so I want to just make explicit that it's also normal. And what I want you to know is that how much these have an impact on your relationships, even when you think that they aren't, because you haven't said them out loud, you haven't admitted them or uttered them, right? They still have this impact. There's a couple of things, but I'm going to name two. One is that they are inherently dehumanizing. The more you think about somebody in terms of a particular label, the more that person kind of gets reduced down to a sort of a two-dimensional version of themselves. And the other thing is that these labels tend to contribute to a confirmation bias. So you start to think of somebody in that way, then you start to notice when evidence of that particular belief shows itself to you, and you might or might not even realize how much you're discounting any other evidence that you would otherwise see. You won't notice it as likely. So any work that you put into reframing how you think about difficult colleagues or direct reports is really well worth it. At the very, very least, this is something I've been working with clients pretty often, is trying on the idea that your reports are sort of your extra special teachers. They're the ones here to really help you develop your management chops. Even that kind of slightly positive reframe, like acknowledges that it can be hard, but that there's something potentially useful happening. That right there is helpful. So, number two. Remind yourself of the bigger why. Why are you wanting to invest energy into this collaborative relationship? Why does it matter to spend time making it go well? This is important to remember when things get rough. So is it because they're an important part of the team? Is it because they really do have potential in this organization? Is it because you want to try to be a decent human being? Like letting yourself really tap into the why makes it easier for you to go, okay, it's reasonable for me to spend time on this. Let me go ahead and do it. Kind of gets you back into more accessibility with a sense of choicefulness. Right? So the third thing that you want to do, and this is kind of before or entering into the conversation, is remember that it's important to start on the right foot. And, this is where I like to quote the Gottmans. They talk about, this is in the context of couples relationships, but they say that 97% of those relationships, conversations, end just about however it is that they began. And so I want you to kind of take that, extrapolate that tendency for things to end how they began, and make sure that you enter in to any feedback conversations feeling as grounded as resourced as you possibly can. So, in other words, if your blood is still boiling from that last email that you saw, then it is not time to talk yet. So you might check out the feedback readiness checklist that I've made, and it's in the Facebook group, the Conscious Communication or NVC at Work Facebook group. Go ahead and take a look there. It's in the unit section. You can check that out and print it up, use it often. It's really helpful for these particularly tough scenarios. So during the conversation, 2 biggies. One, this is step 5, I think, out of our longer list of tips, but this one is, I want you to start with observational feedback with them so that you get less defensiveness in return. So here's what I mean. What does that look like? So when you start offering your feedback and it's front loaded with analysis, your opinions, as valid as they may be, it often sets the stage for a defensive response. So, by the way, defensiveness can be silent, right? So somebody might be just like sitting there and head nodding, and that's not necessarily the goal if it's actually covering up something important. But in terms of the observational feedback, that's the pure facts, the behaviors exhibited, the exact quote. So think of it as the raw data without your analysis or anybody's analysis added in. So for example, you aren't contributing in meetings. That has analysis. That's going to be harder for somebody to hear than if I were to say, for example, you didn't speak during the last 2 meetings and I wanted to talk to you about it. That's a much more observational statement. That's a much easier thing for somebody to hear and to kind of stay with me on. That will produce less defensiveness. So starting off with this kind of observation is just one of sort of like a longer series of things that you want to say during the dialogue itself. And like I said, we go over that as well in the Conscious Comm at Work Facebook group. So, but for now, just that one piece is pretty big. So take lots of pauses. Number 5, when you are frustrated, when you're stressed, when you're in a rush, or all 3, as can be the case, you're much more likely to say something a little sarcastic, a little snarky, or otherwise unskillful. So slow yourself down. So a couple of key phrases, memorize these for intense moments. Let me pause a minute and see how I want to respond. Or let me just sit with your concerns a second. I want to think. Or, I'm going to take a breath right now before I say more. Just giving yourself little pauses or little moments to get kind of back into the space that you think is going to be really productive. It's important. Also during conversations, number 6, I want you to allocate time for some relational check-ins in these one-on-ones. So mini check-ins are really key to building trust. And, it's easier to do it when you find things nice and early. Like to identify problems nice and early, they're much more easier to tend, is what I meant to say. You don't want to just focus on comprehension checks when you're giving feedback. Like, yeah, it's great if you want to check in and see, like, do you understand my instructions or the content of my feedback? But it's also essential that as you're talking to somebody, you get a read on how what you're saying lands for them relationally. So it gives them a sense of mattering. It gives them a sense that you care about them as a whole person. Even if you are dissatisfied with some aspect of their performance, this means a lot to people. So if there is pushback, it's also good to know it because, again, like I said, you want to address it proactively rather than deal with it down the road after it's compounded. So things like, how does this sit for you? Or do you see this different in any key ways than the way I'm sort of, naming it for myself? Any concerns with what I'm saying? Are you hearing any blame in this feedback? And if so, I want to pause and clarify. Any of those are just a few of many, many ways that you can check in relationally and just see, what kind of response you get from people, and gives you a sense of how this really went. So my last tip is really for any time. And this is that you get support for any exasperation, frustration, resentment, anything like that that you're feeling towards any one person for too long. If it keeps sticking around, you want to try to get some support. Because when challenging feelings persist, that's feedback too. That's feedback for you. Don't ignore it. Inevitably, it points to something systemically, either team-based or for the organization. It might reference or kind of refer to something that you missed in a one-to-one in terms of your actual interpersonal connection. And it might point to something in your inner game, something that's going on that's a pattern for you to pay attention to in terms of your growth as a manager. So decode what these feelings are about. And it takes some effort and often a third person perspective, right? So check in with your manager if they're good at this kind of thing, or some other mentor, or, hiring a coach really in these kinds of cases is worth it if it creates less stress and better outcomes and KPIs and brings you kind of quicker results. It can actually lead to quicker promotions I've seen in a number of people. So don't be afraid to get support if you have relational challenges. Yeah. So I'd love to hear your comments below and or see you in the Facebook group. So the Conscious Communication at Work is, the group is up and running and getting going with some guest speakers and so on. Just a forum for you to practice and meet like-minded people. Hope to see you there. Thanks.